that'll help keep you and your family safe. Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about safety, specifically farm safety and homestead safety, and even more specifically about how those things relate to little children that you may have running around your homestead. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to give a quick background. My wife and I are born and raised city folk, and currently we're pushing into our second year of living out in what we would describe as the country. When being in a homestead environment, you end up encountering and getting hands-on with a multitude of things you wouldn't normally be in the city. Things like tractors and electric fences and power tools and small animals and big animals and domesticated animals, wild animals, all sorts of potentially deadly animals. One time there was just a loose horse running down the street while I was tending to the garden. Now obviously there's a learning curve when it comes to interacting properly and safely with all these things. And with that said, me and my wife tried to properly educate ourselves before we first timed all these different things that we encountered hands-on. And even with all that learning we tried to do beforehand, I still feel like a lot of these safety tips were either sort of glossed over or assumed to be obvious in a certain way. So if you're new to a homestead lifestyle, this video is especially for you. And if you're not, then you can join me in refreshing myself in all these different safety tips, because I know I'm guilty of either ignoring or just simply not being mindful of these things. But who knows, maybe you'll learn something new. So let's jump into the first category, which I want to call tractor mower. And I want to kick this off with a tip that inspired me to do this whole video. And that tip is lowering your front loader once the tractor is turned off. When you turn the tractor off, all the hydraulics stay where you left them. So if you have the mower up or the front loader up, they'll stay like that and slowly release over a period of time. So I have twin 3-year-old boys and they absolutely love playing with this little tractor. Very often when we're outside doing something with the cow or doing something with the chickens or just hanging out, they'll come over, and when we're not looking or when we are looking and letting them do it, they come and they play on the tractor. So one of them will get on the tractor and mess with all the knobs and the buttons, and another one will take a bucket of dirt and fill the front loader. The tractor is completely off, but the front loader can still go down. Just like that. So the front loader's on the ground like that. It may seem like it's not a big deal, but if your kids are running around here and they're filling up the front loader with dirt like mine are, and one comes and sits in the chair and pushes this down, it can squish them pretty good. So that's my first protocol when I turn the tractor off. I make sure I lower the hydraulic of the front loader as well as the hydraulic of the mower and the PTO in the back, because all of those things are moving parts that can still move when the tractor's off. And if someone does that while someone's near one of those things, you could have a serious injury on your hands. All right, I'm gonna hit these next tips a little faster because they're a little bit more obvious and easier to explain. And we're still in the tractor mower category. Tip number 2 is that you wanna leave the key out of the ignition of your tractor or your mower, because my kids are only 3, but they're well adept enough to just turn the tractor on if the key's in there. Tip number 3 is that you wanna chalk the wheels. And if you can, park it on the flattest ground possible. And the reason for that is that this tractor can easily be switched into neutral even when it's off. And I know it's different for every machine, but for this one specifically, that's how it works. And if that happens and it gets pushed one way or it's on a hill and someone's standing behind it, that's bad news. Now that's gonna piggyback us off to this next tip, which is to always check that you are in gear before you release the parking brake. And I'll illustrate that with a little story. I was on the top of this hill today with the family, moving the chickens, and at some point, someone or some little kid pushed the tractor just slightly out of gear into neutral. And when I turned the tractor on and let go of the parking brake, instead of going forward, I just started rolling down the hill. Luckily enough, I was able to get to the brake before I got going too fast, which is an issue for this specific tractor because the parking brake is not really a brake. You're supposed to use the reverse as the brake, and that could have gone way worse if I hadn't realized it quick enough. And it also could have gone way better had I just checked that this tractor was in gear before I released the parking brake. Tip number 5 is to make sure that the parking brake is set when you park the tractor. All of those last tips I just described are redundancy protocols that keep this tractor or a lawnmower as safe as possible when you have little kids around. All right, I hope that gave you a few protocols that you can follow, especially if you're new to this, that'll help keep you and your family safe. I think my neighbor was trying to shoot a groundhog or something, but I heard something hit the tree right behind me, so I didn't know if he was shooting up or what. But live action safety. If you're shooting a gun, know your target and beyond. Okay, new day. Of course, got a new shirt on. This next segment has to do with electric fences. Now, inevitably, when you're on a homestead or you move out into the country from the city, you're gonna come in contact with a lot of electric fences. They're just around on people's properties because when people have animals, they often put at least one electric strand around there to keep the animals in. It's important to be mindful of that if you're going and looking at animals, especially with little kids who love to go see other people's animals that may be around your neighborhood, that a lot of people have electric fences. Now, when you have electric fences on your own property, there's a few safety things as well that are good to just keep in mind when you have little kids running around. So tip number one, if you got an electric fence on your property, keeping in chickens or something, is that to just turn the fence off when you go outside and you're spending time outside. Because if you have little kids coming around, it's very likely that they might fall and trip and land on the fence or just go up and touch it. It can give them a pretty nasty shock. And tip number two that sort of piggybacks off that one is to disconnect the cable that attaches to your Energizer to your fence. That's just another safety precaution that can easily be implemented to protect little kids running around your homestead. Another great tip on top of that is to make sure that you wear rubber-soled shoes or boots when you're working around electric fences. Because if you do happen to get shocked when the fence is on, the shock is going to be way more minimal. It's going to just feel like a little static shock compared to like a big hit from an electric fence. Okay, moving on to our next category, safety around farm animals. And that first animal is chickens. The first set of tips in regards to chickens has to do with hygiene. Now, recently the CDC sent out an advisory telling people to stop kissing their chickens. That's right. According to their research, there was 163 cases of salmonella that were all linked back to people kissing or getting too snuggly with their backyard birds. And I know it's difficult to do because they are pretty cute sometimes, and I know my little kids love to come out here and pick up a chicken or two. You gotta keep in mind that a certain amount of their chicken bodies or feet are gonna be touching manure. Even when we have these chickens on fresh, clean grass like this, they get close to each other in the coop where they're gonna be dropping manure, and hopefully it all falls through, but a lot of it doesn't. And there's a certain amount of manure that these chickens are in contact with. And with that premise, I want to say the first tip is to wash your hands after handling poultry. That's just a simple thing you can do after doing chicken chores or coming out here and moving the chickens or tending to the chickens or just hanging out with the chickens with your little kids. Because my little kids love to come out here and get close with the chickens and help with all the chores we have to do. So every time we go inside, I make sure we wash our hands after handling them. Also, when it comes to washing, if you do have chickens, you want to make sure that you wash the eggs before you eat them. Because the egg of a chicken comes straight out their butt. Well, sort of. Tip number two is to know what your animals are capable of. And don't get lazy when you're in there with them. In general, chickens are relatively safe to be around. However, if you get a rooster and he picks up the wrong vibe from someone and maybe come at them. Same goes for this goose we have back here. This goose is pretty tame, but some geese can get aggressive. And if you don't know that about your animal and then introduce something new or have a friend over or your kids' friends over and they go in there and the animal doesn't know them, it's possible that they could get spooked and charge them and bite them and attack them. Especially children have volatile energy and animals are really good at picking up on that. So it's important to know what your animals are capable of. Tip number three is for you to be mindful of your own body and your own space when you're around animals. If you hold a chicken too close to your face, it's possible he could peck you in the eyes. And this is really even more important for large animals like cows. It's easy when you're in a pen with a cow or you're around a cow milking or something like that to get lazy and not be mindful about what's happening. If something falls and makes a noise and spooks a cow, even a gentle cow like Acorn here can easily get spooked and either run or kick. And you want to be extra mindful when you have your kids around because a kid getting kicked by a cow is a lot different than me getting kicked by a cow. And you want to know that at any point, this cow could kick or could run and squish you up against a wall. So it's important to know where your exits are in your pen, where if the cow's contained or not, what the striking distance of a cow's leg is if you're around them. And just be aware of those things because that can really make a big difference for safety. Because most of the time when you're familiar with an animal and they're familiar with you, things feel comfortable. But the reality is that an animal like a cow is a very big animal. Okay, next category has to do with plants in nature. And I really only have one tip for this. And it's learn which plants and which animals are toxic and dangerous that live in your environment. For example, here in the Appalachians, we have a ton of poison ivy. It's an absurd amount. It's in the fields, it's on the tree lines, it's on the trees, in the trees, it's crazy. It's important to know what that looks like and also teach your kids about what that looks like. And I'd say it's even more important to learn the deadly animals in your area. Like here we have copperheads, and they're all over the place. I still haven't seen one yet, but I do know what one looks like, and I know what type of environment they like to live in. So I'm aware of that when we're having fun down by the creek here, and I try to teach my kids about what copperheads look like too. So tip number 2 and how it relates to wildlife is check for ticks. I say that because out here in the East Coast, in the Appalachians, there's a lot more ticks than there were when we were living on the West Coast. Just because we're exposed to it more, and also it's so much wetter here that there is a much larger tick population. There's also a lot larger spring tick population, and those ones can be even more dangerous because they're so small and hard to see. So it's important that we do tick checks every time that we go back in the house after we've been outside playing either in the grass or in the trees or in the forest and things like that. So I think it's really important to educate yourself on the local wildlife, because when you're living in a homestead type environment, you're just bound to run into it more. Okay, one last wildlife nature tip. If you have any loose logs on your property, you're going to want to flip those up. And if you see any like buttons under there, you got to smash them right away. That'll eradicate them from your property and you'll never have the problem again. Okay, next category, power tools and building. When you're on a homestead, you end up having to build a lot of stuff that you wouldn't in a city. We've built our chicken coop, our barn stall, our barn doors, our greenhouse, all sorts of stuff that I would have never built had I been living in a city. When we're working on a project, we often split it up over different days or throughout the day, and it's really easy to leave your saws plugged in. Even though when they're plugged in, there's usually some safety mechanisms on there, you just want to keep them unplugged because it's really easy for a kid to get their hands on them and press the button, because it's pretty obvious the consequences of a spinning blade around a little kid's fingers. Tip number 2 is that you really want to wear gloves when you're building stuff. I have gotten so many splinters and pinched my finger a bunch of times working on things when I think, oh, I'm just going to do this one thing really fast. I'm just going to saw this one thing. I'm just going to screw in this one thing. And I end up smashing my finger. It really happens a lot. So it's super important to just wear safety gloves when you're building things. And tip number 3, which goes along with that, is to just wear your safety glasses every time you're building something. I can't tell you how many times I just think I'm going to just do something really fast. I'm going to make one little cut, but that's when the bad things happen. And that's when the bad things have happened to me, is when I think I'm just going to do something really quickly and I'm not paying attention to the super simple safety protocols. So just wear those gloves and glasses. I promise you it will save you from something. It will. So thank you so much for watching. Catch you later.